Hi there. So I have been asked by a YouTube channel member if I would do a video outlining extreme hunger, the sort of video that they could share with family members or somebody that's not experienced an eating disorder. So that's what I'm going to do. If you haven't experienced an eating disorder, and say if you're just an onlooker on the process, if a person with an eating disorder begins to truly eat without restriction and eat in accordance to mental hunger, then that can look like a really extreme amount of food. It can look certainly like an abnormally large amount of food. And that's kind of the point. When one of the body's vital resources, so we've got food, water, oxygen, so that's what I mean by vital resources, those are resources that the body can't live without. And it can't live for oxygen for very long at all. It can't live with water for, it can live without water for like a medium long time, and it can live without food for a bit longer. But ultimately, any one of those resources, if that's in deficit, the body has a problem. And so because of this, and because of the importance of those three things, food, water, and oxygen, for our continued survival, should one of those things go into deficit, then it's like the body has a mechanism for solving that problem once it has access to that resource. So for example, if you hold your breath for as long as you can, after a pretty short time of holding your breath, all you can think about is breathing. You know, it's not like you can hold your breath and sort of like just study or do something else. You can't do anything because your brain is so preoccupied with, I need to breathe. That's your brain trying to draw your attention to the fact that you're not breathing and it needs oxygen. So all of your attention goes to the topic of breathing. And then when you are able to breathe again, what happens is this, you gasp for air. And gasping is a mechanism by which the body can intake an abnormally large amount of air in order to amend a deficit of air. And you'll gasp for a little bit, and then when that deficit of air has been amended, you just go back to normal breathing. It's not like your body works out, oh, you know what, gasping gets me more air, so I'm just going to keep on doing that. Your body doesn't want to gasp. It's not particularly optimal for it to breathe in that manner, but it's doing it because it's in deficit and it needs to get in as much as possible. In the same way, if you don't drink any fluids all day, not recommended, but say if that happens, you'll find that after a couple of hours, your brain will keep on coming back to the topic of, I need to drink something. And you'll start to think about fluids all the time if you don't allow yourself access to it and you're really thirsty. And a bit the same as if you are in a deficit of air. If you're in a deficit of fluid, then what will happen once you give yourself access to fluids? So you get a glass of water. At the end of that day, no drinking, you get a glass of water. What happens is that when you go to drink that water, you can't just sip it normally. Even if you really try, it won't work. What will happen is you will gulp that water down. And again, that gulping action is a mechanism that the body has when it needs to intake more water or more fluid because it's in a deficit of fluid. It's a mechanism that the body has to solve that problem. And same as gasping for air, if you gulp down a glass of water when you're hydrated, you'll go back to normal drinking. It's not like your body's like, oh, gulping works, I get more water, and it just goes back to being able to sip. But you'll also find that if you're really thirsty and if you try and just sip water, it's like it doesn't work. You're kicking the can down the road. At some point, you're going to gulp. In the same way, if you've been holding your breath underwater for a long time and you try and come up and breathe normally, at some point you're going to gasp, even if you just try to sort of override that desire to gasp for air. Extreme hunger for a person that has an eating disorder is the same thing. The body's in deficit of food. Mental hunger is what the brain does when we're in deficit of food, which is the body trying to draw our attention to the fact that we're in deficit of food. So you just think of food the whole time. When you allow yourself access to food, and I mean proper access, like you're going for unrestricted eating, what will that will look like is that your body will intake an abnormally large amount of food to make up for the deficit. And that's what we term a binge as. That's what binging's called. So binging is just almost an inevitable part of eating disorder recovery for a lot of us. And a lot of people find that, say, if they are trying to avoid binging and so they're giving themselves limited access to food, in the same way, if you try not to gasp for air after holding your breath, at some point the binge is going to come. Because it's just a biological mechanism that the body has developed to help it intake an abnormally large amount of food when it's in deficit of food. It's not particularly interesting when you look at it in the context of gasping for air or gulping water or binging food. It's not deeply psychological. We don't have to look at it through the lens of a psychoanalyst and sort of work out why it's doing that. It's quite biological. It's quite boring, honestly. And the same as the other two examples that I've given, when your body's out of deficit of food, of energy, it doesn't continue to binge. That's not optimal for it. It doesn't want to do that. It's doing it because desperate times call for desperate measures, but it doesn't want to eat that way. That is not desirable for the body, to intake a huge amount of food and have to process that all at once, blah, 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 blah. And so as you nutritionally rehabilitate, the urge to binge diminishes. And in fact, quite amazingly, your capacity to even eat that much starts to diminish as well. It was incredible to me when I was in recovery from an eating disorder, how much food I could eat. Like, it was a mental amount of food, an unfathomable amount of food that I was able to eat. And of course, I had all these fear-based thoughts about, I'm going to eat like this forever, blah, 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 blah. You know what? None of that happened. What happened is, as I nutritionally rehabilitated, the urge to binge just sort of waned off, went away, and I've never done it since. In fact, I don't think that I could physically push myself to eat that amount of food. It was like when I was in energy deficit, my body had this magical capacity to intake a huge amount of food. And it doesn't have that now because I'm not in energy deficit anymore. It goes away. And so that's all extreme hunger is. It's the body trying to push you to intake an abnormally large amount of food. It's a solution to the problem of energy deficit. It's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. And I imagine why I've been asked to make this video so that people can show it to parents and things like that is because to onlookers, it can look alarming. The amount of food that we have to eat can look alarming. So don't worry about it. It's just what the body needs to do. And when the body's no longer in energy deficit, we won't need to do that anymore. Hope that helps.